The only reason he was attacked because he come from Walton, so he was picked on merely because of his postcode.
And it was 6.5 minutes of sheer terror. What must have been going through his head knowing that he was trapped like that?
Imagine getting brutally murdered for being in the wrong zip code. Scary, right? But that's sadly what happened to Sean. When Sean went to do his laundry at a nearby laundromat, he never imagined that a normal, boring evening would turn into a horrible nightmare. One that would end with him bleeding in an alley. And what's even worse, his assailants would be the young boys who came to be known as the baby-faced killers. Sean McHugh was well known in the community. Everyone called him Shorty because of his height, but he was said to have a big personality that made everyone want to be his friend. At 19 years old, Sean lived in a small town called Walton in Liverpool, England, with his girlfriend Stephanie Crawford, whom he had known since he was 14. He was really close with his mom, Lorraine, who described him as always smiling and with a heart of gold. He worked in construction and loved fishing and motorbikes. On September 30th, 2013, Sean and his friend Josh Williams went to do some laundry at a nearby laundromat in Anfield, but he never returned. Around that time, police received this distress call.
Emergency. Please, there's a laundress on Priory Road. Someone just went in and blocked the door in the office. There's someone outside in the shop hall. They're kicking the door in.
When the police arrived a short while later, they found Sean at the back of the shop, bleeding profusely with a gaping wound on his thigh. They immediately rushed him to the hospital, where doctors tried everything they could to save him, but to no avail. Sean died 4 days later. The brutal nature of how he was killed shook everyone in the community and even made national headlines. His family and girlfriend were completely heartbroken and could not understand why anyone would want to hurt Sean. Sean's funeral was attended by over 1,000 people who came to pay their respect and show their support to his family. Meanwhile, the police were using surveillance footage from around the area to try and identify the people responsible for the horrific crime. And what they found shocked everyone. Now, due to the brutality and the boldness in which the crime was committed, police were expecting the perpetrators to be hardened thugs who had been in the streets for years. However, what they actually found was much more terrifying. The criminals were baby-faced teenagers, some of whom were as young as 13 years. They included 13-year-olds Joseph McGill and Corey Hewitt, his cousin Andrew Hewitt, who is 15 years old, 14-year-old Kiefer Dykstra, and 19-year-old Reese O'Shaughnessy. They were members of a street gang called Lanehead, which consisted of troubled teenagers from dysfunctional families in Anfield. The gang was led by Reese and would go around harassing people and committing petty crimes. A few hours after Sean's attack, investigators learned that the boys were going around bragging about Sean's death. They were reportedly sending chilling text messages to each other and even posting on Facebook about what they did. One of the boys reportedly texted a friend, "Watch if something we done is on the paper tomorrow on Priory. If we get nicked, we're going to jail anyway, ha ha ha." Another particularly sick post on Facebook, which was written by Kayford, read, "R.I.P. Shorty, we always knew you was a p-." And get this, Sean was actually in the hospital fighting for his life at that time. When another boy asked on Facebook, "That kid dead, haha," he got the reply, "He's got 3 days to live, lad." That's really creepy because Sean actually died 3 days later, as predicted. But it gets worse. Even after killing Sean, these little sickos continued to taunt Sean's family by writing graffiti around the neighborhood, with messages like, "Sean, he's 6 feet under." But where did all of this hatred and animosity come from? During the investigation, the police learned that around 2 months ago, Kiefer Dykstra had been knifed during a fight with members of a rival gang called Walton Village Head. While he did survive his injuries, he swore revenge on any member of the Village Head gang. So, when Kiefer learned that Sean had been seen around Anfield, he and his gang went out to confront them. Kiefer and his crew had seen Sean hanging out with members of the rival gang, and so they believed he was one of them, but the police could not find any evidence to support that. Security cameras from various shops on the street captured Sean and Josh being chased by the group of boys. Josh entered a nearby news dealer shop, while Sean was chased into the laundromat. In the footage, you can see Sean dashing inside the laundromat with his soon-to-be attackers running closely behind him. He probably thought that he was safe and that the young goons would give up and leave him alone, but they didn't. In fact, they actually went out to a nearby path where they usually hide their weapons and came back armed with a broomstick, knives, and an antique sword cane, which is basically a walking cane with a hidden blade. In the footage, Reese is seen carrying the sword stick, while Kiefer has a knife with him. The boys didn't seem to care that there were some witnesses around, and they proceeded to break down the door where Sean was hiding. One of the boys, later identified as 13-year-old Joseph, is seen in the footage pouring some detergent on the floor, so that when Sean tried to escape, he would slip over and fall. I can't even begin to imagine just how terrified Sean must have been at that moment. After breaking the door, the boys are seen piling inside the room, and what happened next was something that would later be described as 6 minutes of sheer terror.
And it was 6.5 minutes of sheer terror. What must have been going through his head knowing that he was trapped like that and that there were these yobs armed trying to get at him, God only knows.
Sean somehow managed to escape and got to the back alley of the shop, but these bloodthirsty thugs followed him and plunged a 2-foot blade into his leg, cutting a major artery. That's where the police found him. The sword cane was also found dumped in a roadside ditch. In a documentary series, Britain's Deadliest Kids, the detective who led the investigation said that the only reason Sean was attacked was because of where he lived.
The only reason he was attacked because he come from Walton, so he was picked on merely because of his postcode.
All 5 of the boys were soon arrested and charged in connection with Sean's death. However, they all denied the charges and started pointing fingers at each other. One boy said that Reese was the one responsible for the stabbing, while Reese claimed that another boy had taken the blade from him. The other boys admitted that there had been some sort of struggle, but still claimed that they were not involved. In the end, it was decided that since all boys had acted together like a pack of animals, with the single purpose of causing harm to Sean, they should all be charged as a joint enterprise. A joint enterprise is whereby an individual can be jointly convicted of the crime of another, if the court decides they foresaw that the other party was likely to commit the crime. This meant that all of the boys would be charged with murder, which is a really serious crime, but strangely did not seem to bother the boys who were actually laughing and joking around in court while the trial was going on.
It was like they were on holiday. They were laughing and joking and smirking. They were tossing paper at one another. One of the boys who was on bail was actually remanded into custody during the trial because of his conduct.
The judge tried several times to get them to behave, but it was like they didn't really care. Sean's mother, Lorraine, said in an interview that she felt like the boys were actually mocking her, and at some point she had to leave the courtroom.
They were just laughing at us, just smirking all the time and wouldn't give up. Had to leave the court.
Now, several people have tried to explain this disruptive behavior. Some think that the boys were just too dumb and young to understand the seriousness of the situation they were in, while others believe that the boys were acting out to make everyone believe that they were tough and didn't care what happened to them. Either way, the jury did not take this behavior lightly, and after deliberating for 17 hours, they found all 5 boys guilty of murder. Reese and Kiefer received a unanimous verdict, while Andrew, Joseph, and Corey received a 10-2 verdict. During the sentencing, the judge described the crime as a truly wicked one, saying that the boys chased Sean like a marauding mob. Each one of the boys was sentenced in accordance with the role he had played in the murder. Reese, being the leader of the gang, was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison because he was the one carrying the murder weapon, which meant that he might have been the one responsible for the stabbing. Kiefer, who was described by the prosecution as Reese's second in command, got 12 years in prison because he had a knife during the altercation and was the one who started the chase. Both Andrew and Joseph got 9 years each for their contribution to the murder. Andrew was jailed because he was the first one to physically confront Sean, while Joseph, who was one of the youngest members of the gang, received this sentence because he gave Kiefer a knife and also poured detergent on the floor to stop Sean from getting away. The second youngest member of the group, Corey Hewitt, had not taken part in any physical altercation, but he was there when the others chased Sean and cornered him. He had also witnessed the stabbing and even picked up the murder weapon when Reese dropped it. The prosecution argued that he did this because he wanted to hide the weapon. He was sentenced to a minimum of 6 years in jail. Although no amount of jail time will bring Sean back, his family could at least get closure knowing that his killers were paying for the crime.
I'm just glad we got justice for Sean. So I wanted them to thank everybody for what they've done for us.
What do you think about this case? Do you think the boys intended to kill Sean? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.